All right. So welcome, Sheron. I'm super excited to talk to you. Yeah, I've always I've loved working with you at Lighthouse, even though we don't teach classes or anything together. It's just always a pleasure to see you in the meetings, and I love your energy and the way you show up, and you always seem to be in great spirits. So I don't know what your secret is, but you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, so today we're basically talking about you and your spin on communications, your spin on women and public speaking or confidence, or all these pieces that I know you have a lot to say about because you have a lot of experience in this area. So I'm curious if you could share with us a little bit about how you got started as a communications coach in this field.
Okay, well, I've always had a passion for language in general. And so I actually started my career in international education. So I lived down in both Panama and Costa Rica, and I was a teacher of English for speakers. At that time, it was mostly Spanish speakers. But then when I moved back to the US, based in San Francisco, I was given the opportunity to consider getting into away from international education and into communicating, specifically like trainings that would go to varying companies. And I was a little bit on the fence because I felt so tied to my international adult students. And I was like, I'm not sure if I want to enter this space. I'll miss the students too much. But then as soon as I stepped into helping people to think through what their content needed to be, thinking about what their objective in speaking was, I said, wow, this is really impactful. And it can apply to so many people, whether they're non-native English speakers or not. And so beginning in a coaching one-on-one level has really helped me to be like, okay, I'm interested in doing the training and then the follow-up so I can really see people transform how they're able to show up in different types of situations.
And you were down when you were doing your ESL stuff, were you only in Costa Rica, or were you in other places as well?
So Panama and Costa Rica, I kind of got my toe wet in Panama. My grandma's from Panama. So I was like, I'm going to Panama. Let's go ahead and get some Spanish in my life. Let's get more fluent and then take my English and let's see how that starts me out for it. And so I say I got my toe wet because it was just a sample. I was down there for maybe a little under a month, and I'd already secured a teaching gig. I had my students and they were improving. And then I needed to come back to the US. But I went and spent a full year down in Costa Rica. And that was where I was working with people that were working during the day and really dedicated to studying and improving their English skills for business or just their lives. And we did that in the evenings. And so that was when I was like, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm loving it. I'm loving how people are so dedicated to taking their communication to the next level, whether it's English only or just overall thought processes.
Yeah, I love working with clients and students like that. You really feel like, wow, am I that dedicated to what I'm doing? And you're lifting heavy weights for sure. Yeah. And when you started working at Decker, did you continue with that ESL work on the side, or how has that kept going in your life, if at all?
I didn't continue teaching in that aspect because when I started working with Decker, it was much more on a kind of like a per diem basis. So, Sheron, are you available to go to Seattle on Tuesday? Are you available to go to Utah next Thursday? That kind of thing. So I was really flowing in between, hey, let's go and experience and see different things. But though I wasn't teaching, just as part of my core in life, I've always maintained this interest in international culture. So maybe it was just watching a documentary or some video or talking to somebody that had an accent, me trying to figure out where's this person from. So that kind of casual thing, but not officially with my work.
Yeah. And I love, so I have also this kind of weird, like nerdy thing about me that I'm always trying to guess where people are from, where is their accent. And it's interesting because I just moved to Lisbon, and you hear a lot of languages on the street all the time. Like probably every day I hear about 5 different languages. And then sometimes I'll hear people from those other languages speaking in English, but more here than anywhere else. I've just been like, where is this person from? Like, I have no idea. And that's super nerdy and exciting for me.
It is.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like, 'cause that happens in London with me a lot too, with my husband being from the UK, we'll be on the tube for a while. So I'm like, is it the tube or the underground? The tube is in DC, the underground in London, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be on the tube. And so I will be sitting there, listening to a conversation that's being had on the underground, and I'm asking myself, where do you think and I'll ask where do you think they're from? Because I'm much more familiar with a lot of the languages that we hear in the US on a consistent basis, but there's different nationalities that are represented in varying parts of Europe that I may not have ever encountered face to face before. So I'm there on the nerding out on it, like guessing. And then the ultimate is when you're able to actually find out if you're right. So if it happens to be a conversation, oh, where are you from? Are you from Lithuania? Yes, I am. How did you know? Those kinds of things are like, I was right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that leads me to the question that I always get, and I'm sure you get it a lot with your clients who are non-native speakers, who say something like, how can I get rid of my accent? Or they're so focused on getting rid of their accent, it becomes almost this anxiety-inducing thing. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
I always encourage my non-native English speakers, especially because I've done a lot of international work. It's not, the goal is not, I don't think it should be, to get rid of an accent. Accents are so beautiful. They just allow people to know that, hey, you are at least bilingual, probably multilingual, but there are things that we can do when we are presenting in our non-native language to allow ourselves to be more clearer when it comes to being able to hear us. So honestly, it ends up being specific things that they can do. For example, I was doing a workshop in Paris, and all of the participants were native French speakers, and they were speaking so quickly in English and at a lower tone, probably pretty similarly to how they would speak in French, quickly and at a low, almost whisper, just a little touch above a whisper. And I said, we're going to have to do some changes so that we can be more effective when we're communicating cross-culturally with your global organization. So what I noticed, whether someone is a native French speaker, native Spanish speaker, whatever language that is the native tongue, there's two things that I always tell people to consider. And that is to speak louder. You gotta speak louder. And when they speak louder, they automatically slow down a touch. That helps. And then I actually learned from a colleague of ours, another tip would be to encourage them to open the mouth when speaking English just 5% wider.
And how does that help?
It automatically allows much more enunciating to come through. So for people of varying backgrounds, it just makes it clear universally while allowing that natural, beautiful accent to come through, but at a higher volume.
Right. And how has that worked when you've coached people to just open your mouth 5% wider while you talk? I imagine that's kind of a weird thing to coach people on.
Yeah, at first they're kind of skeptical. Let's be honest, they're skeptical. Like, okay, why does she have me opening my mouth 5? What is 5% wider? First off.
Exactly. What's 100%? How wide can my mouth even go? Yeah.
And so I have them try it. And then of course we have to record them and play it back. And they're amazed at the difference the small tweak makes in allowing us to hear the fullness of their voice. Yeah,
that's great. So it's basically showing them in real time, like, hey, this was before and this was after. Yeah, super helpful technique. Yeah. And so curious, because you're here speaking on camera and you're very authentic and you're natural and you're speaking loudly and with confidence and all those things. And of course, you're a communications trainer, but has there ever been a time when it wasn't so easy for you, or wasn't seemingly so easy for you? I don't know if this is easy for you per se, but tell us about kind of maybe the before, if there was a before.
Okay, I can tell you that when I first started out making that transition from, first I made a couple of career transitions, honestly. So going from English as a second language instructor to marketing and recruiting within the international space. I did not workshops, what are these? Orientations every week. But then
Mhm.
going from that international education sector into learning and development, specifically when I was supposed to be the communication expert in the room, it took me a little while, a couple of months, we'll say, to really own that space because
Mhm.
I was so used to being in a different sector with a different objective for why I was speaking. Let me acclimate you to your new city. Let me tell
Mm.
you how to make the most of your time here in San Francisco, as opposed to let me guide you along the way to being more influential with how you're speaking. So as
Right.
I learned along the way, I said, okay, it was kind of more of a practicing what you preach. I was encouraging them to do certain things, and then it became part of my overall way of communicating. And
Mhm.
so areas where I was reporting on theory, if you will,
Mm.
and not necessarily having a whole bunch of practice in a way
Mm.
of being polished and confident. It was conversational, but maybe not to the next level.
Mhm.
When dealing with certain CEOs or managers at different companies over
Mhm.
time, noticing how I was able to take on certain behaviors helped me to be more effective in that space and allow it to be part of me overall.
Right. And would you say that that was just a process of time and you getting used to it to when you could own it, as you said?
Yeah, definitely. Just the experience. What is that?
Mhm.
Life or experience is the best teacher.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
having a couple of experiences and then really know, like really being able to be confident in what I was going to say. That's
Mhm.
always a booster for me, whether it's been a bit
Mhm.
of practice or a little bit of study combined with practice. That ends up being the most helpful thing for me too. Like I know what I'm talking about. So now I can speak with that confidence instead of murmuring, hoping I can get through it.
Right, right. And curious, and we didn't talk about this in the pre-call or anything, but when you do your presentations, when you do virtual presentations, I get this question all the time too. Do you use a script? Like how much are you relying on notes and how much are you maybe owning that content a little bit more and riffing on things?
Okay, well, when it's a new session or a new class that I'm doing, I will typically have a printed out note right next to me in my workspace.
Mhm.
But I use it as a guide. The idea is that I want to use it as a guide and trust that I've done the pre work of knowing my key teaching points so that
Mhm.
I can really just speak to whoever my audience and participants are, engage with them in this virtual space by looking at the camera without feeling like I have to be so rigid in the
Mhm.
content that I am presenting. But
Yeah.
I will print it out just to keep me on track because I don't want to go too far down sharing examples and stories. Just to keep everything organized, I will keep some notes close by.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I do the same thing. And so when you talk about doing the pre-work, like you do the pre-work of familiarizing yourself with the teaching points, with the content, this is always interesting. And I have my own theory on this, but how do you know when you've done enough pre-work? Like, how do you know when you're ready to go live?
I definitely feel like I'm ready when I've said it enough times aloud, like I'm not practicing in my head, but I'm literally saying it aloud, and I
Mhm.
can leave the script, if you will, go do something else at home, at the house. So maybe I'm washing dishes, for lack of a better example, right now, and I can hear certain phrases, key phrases, and stories playing in my head the way that I plan to say them. That lets
Mhm.
me know, okay, I'm developing some muscle memory in this. I've done
Mhm.
enough pre-work. Now let's free myself up to change exactly how I tell that story each time. So it's not like a line by line verbatim, I must say it like this, but I
Yeah.
know the fullness of what I want to say so that it can remain conversational for this audience.
Yeah, totally. For me, it's definitely this emotional shift that happens. Like I'll pre whatever teaching at like a class or workshop I'm going to teach,
Mhm.
pre that class, if I'm still feeling anxiety about teaching the class instead of excitement, then
Ooh.
I know, oh, okay, I better go back to those notes and kind of practice. And I love what you said about practicing aloud, because I think so many people don't understand the value of actually hearing your own voice spoken and like you said, that muscle memory of getting it out of your mouth. And I know if I haven't done that enough, I feel anxious, but then one day after practicing so much, I'll just turn a corner and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm excited now. I can't wait to teach these people. And it's literally that shift. Does that happen for you too?
Now you mentioned that the shift going from anxious to excitement. I love that. I feel like sometimes that does happen for me.
Uh-huh.
I've experienced that before, but I've never thought about saying it that way. So thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, no problem. No problem. So, I've told you that I work with a lot of women, and we're always talking about the concept of confidence and how to be able to speak with confidence, no matter what the situation is, how much you've prepared. I hear it a lot from women that say, "Oh, I feel confident if I've prepared enough." And a lot of times we don't have time to prepare. We just need to be able to say something and feel good in what we say. So I'm curious for you, what's been your journey with confidence throughout either your life or your career, or what stories come up for you around that topic?
For me, I look at it two ways.
Mm-hmm.
We actually talk to a lot of our clients about both the internal and external confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some areas of teaching, in some areas of my life, like hobbies that I've been doing for years, like Cuban salsa dance, I have a certain level of confidence with that. With certain classes that I've done a multitude of times, I have a certain level of confidence with that. And so that internal confidence is there. But what I do is guide people along the way with, if we're not feeling internally confident yet, how we can fake it until you feel it, honestly. So what body language do I need to have? Even if I am feeling nervous, I'm not excited yet, I'm still kind of nervous. How can I present myself? So noticing that for myself, being open with my body language, that really does make a difference. Because I'm not closing in on myself. I'm not crossing my arms, creating this barrier with my in-person or virtual audience, those kinds of things. That physiologically helps me to feel like, okay, I'm stepping into something that I'm aiming to get to mentally in the near future. So that, and then being sure that I'm able to speak with a louder volume, that also helps me with that external confidence. And I can say for sure that I've noticed in our field, we get a lot of feedback from colleagues, feedback from our participants and our coachees. I've noticed when I've tapped into an area that helps it be both confidence and credibility that comes through for them.
Can you say more about that? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
When I'm able to allow for pauses, information, and that I'm allowing myself to give a pause to see how it's being received instead of rushing through.
I'm curious about the fake it till you make it bit, because I think so many people struggle with that. It is great advice, and I give it too. And I'm wondering, well, I'll go into an anecdote / story. So many times I'm coaching the women I work with. I do like 6-month group coaching courses. And the goal at the end of it is they want to have more confidence when they speak, right? So that's the transformation.
Yeah.
And every single time in every presentation I give, every workshop I give within this course, every one-on-one coaching I give, I'm always like, hey, have you tried standing up when you talk? Because that actually gives you a lot more confidence and makes you feel more powerful. So that's, and I'll finish that story by saying it is like pulling teeth to get people to stand up. It's just really hard. And so anyway, that's something that I struggle with my clients. And that's one way that I get them to, quote, fake it until you make it. Do you have certain strategies that you coach your people on so they can fake it till they make it?
Yes. And it all starts with the mind for me. I encourage them to create a short affirmation that they can say in those moments when they're not feeling confident. And I've done that myself. For example, there was a workshop that I was leading called Situational Leadership. That is typically a 2-day course. It's typically a 2-day course. But I was at a client and they needed it to be condensed from 2 days to 5 hours.
Mm,
You can imagine there was a lot of shifting, like what should be said, what has to be omitted, but we still want people to have the value that they're expecting to have from this situational leadership course.
right. Yeah.
And so I was delivering it, newly certified, delivering it for a year without fail, got pretty nice reviews. But there was one particular, I think it was a Wednesday, one particular Wednesday, I had participants that were asking me so many questions that weren't included in my plans for the class because I was aiming to keep it high level.
Right. Because you didn't have enough time. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I got some reviews that, and I mean, no facilitator ever wants to hear this. They said, oh, well, not they, one, but that was enough to make a difference.
That's
One
enough.
feedback said, yeah, she was just a facilitator. She
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
want us to go deep
Ow.
and have a learning. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I think it was that person right there. I think they said that to me because I was remembering those in-person encounters with them. But that bad feedback allowed
Mm,
me to reevaluate. Okay, am I making it too high level? Maybe I do need to dig a little bit deeper. Yes, it stung hearing that, but
right.
it did provoke me to go ahead and dig deeper into areas where I really needed to be sure that it was clear, it was
Mm,
adapted, but still usable by those
mm,
participants. So
mm.
did some refreshing of the course over the next week. The next time I went in to do that same class, still 5 hours only, I had a whole new approach with how we were going to run the class, new activities, etc. But I
Mm.
still wasn't feeling completely confident, and it was just an experiment. And so, what I had to do, getting out of my car and walking into that campus, I had to tell myself, Sheron, you know what you're talking about. Sheron,
Mm, mm,
this is going to go well. Sheron,
mm,
your audience is going to benefit from what you have to say. And I
mm,
kept running it over my mind. And I
mm.
walked into that room and I said, okay, here we go, here we go. And don't get me wrong, I had to say that to myself a couple more times because I was remembering the most recent bad feedback from that one person that really
She
did.
was just a facilitator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I said, okay, no, I'm more than just a facilitator. You're going to have some deep learnings today. So all of those things that I said to myself in the morning before beginning the class, it really helped me to get through that new refreshed content. And
Mm,
those reviews reflected that.
mm.
Reflected the boost, the nuggets of wisdom were spread and taken out of that room, which is what the whole objective was.
Totally. And what strikes me about that is your affirmation that time wasn't necessarily about, I'm great and I'm going to do a great job, but it was, I'm going to provide value to these people, or they're going to get a lot out of it. And that's one thing that I find really helps me whenever I'm feeling maybe anxious before a workshop or a webinar or something. I have to focus on, okay, I'm going to provide a lot of value. They're going to walk away feeling like they learned something. And then that helps me turn the notch down on the anxiety because it takes the focus off of me.
Yes.
And I think that's really what causes so many people so much stress is when they think, oh my God, I have to talk for 30 minutes nonstop and, do this performance. And it's really sad because that's a lot of pressure. Who wants to do that? That's why actors get paid so much, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I can agree with you on that for sure. Anything that I can do that I've noticed for me, I pass it on to my clients. So let's take that pressure off of myself. It isn't about me. It's not. Back in the
Yeah.
day, some of the tech clients that we would go to, they would have outlets in the store. And there
Mhm.
were a couple of occasions where I would trip, not necessarily fall, but trip, not walk as gracefully over those outlets. And I would just have to roll it off. It's not about me. Who
Yeah.
cares that I just tripped? Did you all get
Yeah.
the point of that activity? That was what we were focusing on. And it just allowed so much more lightness and freedom because I
Totally.
knew that the content was doing what it was set out to do. And I was just the messenger of that content. And it
Exactly.
humanized me, who hasn't tripped before over an outlet that's in the middle of the workspace.
100%. Yeah. Why do they put those outlets there? That's so dumb. Um, and you know what that brings to mind is I can't remember what book I read it in, but it was one of those books about how to win friends and influence people or something like that. And it was something about some statistic or fact that said within the first 3 minutes of a talk like that you are giving, you are the presenter, you are the speaker.
Mhm.
The goal is to be flawless, right? Flawless. We'll just put that in air quotes because what does that really mean? But the goal is to have confidence and really nail it in the first several minutes. And then, and this is so weird, within that first 5 minutes, like the 2 minutes after the 3 minutes, if you do something, and the idea is that it's not purposeful, you don't do it on purpose, but it just happens, like you happen to trip on the extension cord or whatever. If you do something like that, then your likability factor is meant to go up. So because, like you said, it's humanizing you. And it's just like, yeah, you've got to demonstrate, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I've got some credibility. I'm confident, all these things. But then if you do something that's not so perfect, then they're like, and she's human too. We love her. So I just always thought that was so interesting.
I love that. And it makes me think about several influential women who have told stories that humanize them by saying, this is really embarrassing. I actually did this, but it's a learning for everyone else. And so it allows us to see that speaker in a fresh new way. Like, okay, I relate to them more. They're still quite polished and credible, but whoa, that humanization for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, not to mention all the learning that we get out of it, because, and this is something that I wanted to bring up as well, is that so many of the women that I work with, and it's normal, I did it too when I was younger, not so much anymore, but put people on a pedestal. They put other women on a pedestal who are maybe further along in their careers and say like, oh, she's great. And how did she get to that place? And what did she do? And I'm always interested in the stories of failure, because I think that really, it humanizes us, and it helps other women see that, hey, we're all trying to figure out how to do this thing. There's this, there's a big myth that there is a way to do it, and there is one way to do it. Anything come up for you, like stories that you've maybe shared before of, besides tripping over the cord, but something that was really like, ow, like, I screwed that up, or that was a big failure, if you would call it that.
Yeah. Let me think for just a moment, because my typical example is that one where I didn't deliver the content that was needed for that audience. And they said that I was just a facilitator. That felt like failure to me. But outside of that.
Yeah. And that's the one we talked about when we had our one-on-one call. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking in a one-on-one where actually, there was a one-on-one. And it was interesting because I was providing feedback to a client who was significantly older than me. And I feel like she looked at me maybe as, oh, who's this young woman that's aiming to provide feedback to me? Even though lots of times we might look in different age than we actually are. So as I gave her this feedback, I noticed that she had this really great personality, full of life, full of volume, when she was just casually chatting with fellow participants. But as soon as she went to the front of the room, she talked at such a low level. It was like a completely different person. The personality, the demeanor was completely different. And so I brought it to her attention. I said, it sounds like you might be speaking a little bit lower than typically. But I didn't really press it too much. I didn't really let her know that was what needed to happen to make her more effective.
Okay.
So I mentioned it, but not as urgently, if you will.
Yeah.
So when we went back into the space and one of her colleagues said that same feedback, you're not speaking loud enough with confidence, then she took it on board. And I said, wow, I have to trust my gut. If I'm noticing something really objectively, like you're talking loud when you're just conversing casually, but now you're whispering to us when you're the keynote speaker, there's a disconnect there. So being able to observe that and provide that feedback confidently, knowing that it's going to help her to come across as she is desiring to, and seeming consistent in different parts of the day. You're meeting the same person at the coffee stand that you are listening to, who's giving the updates on the company in the afternoon session.
Totally. Yeah.
Definitely learning.
Yeah, the way you delivered it to her, you were essentially hedging you weren't trusting your gut, you were hedging, well, maybe you could do it. And yeah, I noticed that so much. I did that a lot when I first started coaching because I wasn't trusting myself. And I noticed that a lot with the women I work with too. They've got so many hedging words all the time. It's just like, do you believe this or not? What do you believe? And really getting clear with that. It's challenging. It can be tough. So yeah. So hedging is one way that we can minimize our confidence when we're speaking. And I'm curious for you because obviously you're a communications coach, you have a really direct and clear and relatable speaking style. And for you, I'm curious how, besides the hedging example, has your speaking style changed very much as you've either taken on more responsibility or changed careers and roles or just gotten older? How has it changed, if at all?
I do a bit more prep work before I go into an encounter. I literally pause for a moment and say, okay, why are we meeting? What is the objective of this? So I can have something to aim for. So if something happens, a question comes that I was not expecting, or an activity doesn't go as planned, I can really ground myself in what is the objective? What is going to make me feel like check mark, job well done, though all of these surprises happened along the way. So really refreshing and deciding what the objective is something that I take into most of my encounters, whether they're inside the workplace or not. So one coaching, what's my objective with this new manager? Do we want them to tap into a new level of communication competence? Okay, how can we go about doing that? When it comes to having sessions with groups of people, why am I leading these people with this particular topic? So really being aware of what the outcomes I'm after are, that helps me to be sure to allow myself to provide the space that one-on-one participants or a group of clients need. So it's a success.
Yeah, for sure. That's super helpful. And it's something that I've read and I also teach about just leadership in general, always being prepared with like you're saying, like, what are we aiming for here? Because it's so easy to get lost in the weeds in our meetings, in our communications. But if we have a higher level idea or thing that we're trying to present or aim for, it helps everything. But yeah, I would say most people that I work with, they don't really prepare that much before they speak. And then they say, well, I don't know why I don't have confidence, or I don't know why I can't be concise in what I'm saying. And I'm like, well, have you thought about it at all? Like, take a little time. So yeah, that's great that you say that. What about, I get a lot of questions from women that they work, especially in tech, with a lot of men. And they often say, gosh, I'm in a room full of men and we're in a meeting and I can't get my voice in there. Like there's no space for me to share what I'm thinking. Have you struggled with that, or do you coach, especially women, on that? And what's your advice for that particular problem?
My advice for women in that situation is to do something different physically. A quick example, I had a one-on-one client who worked at a tech company, and it was part of the culture. Everybody brought their laptops to in-person meetings. So this is before the pandemic.
Right.
They would bring their laptops to in-person meetings and they would sit on couches, so very casual, but they would be doing work during the meetings that she was leading. They're there, but they're not listening to me. They're not paying attention to me.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, this is what you can try it out, and then report back to me, because I think this is really going to make a difference for you. So I encouraged her to, instead of just leaning back in the casual atmosphere of the couch, I said, why don't you scoot to the edge of your posture is different. Close your laptop and talk a little bit louder than you typically would and say, we're getting ready to begin our meeting. Try those two things. Change your posture, give a little bit more volume. And she said, you know what, Sheron, I did it. And my team was listening to me. I felt like, oh my gosh, it's all eyes on me. I'm not used to this. And I appreciate it. So those two small things, seemingly small things, made such a huge difference for her. And so that became her routine after that, to just set a tone for what was going to come. We're here to handle business, not to sit on the couch doing work during the meeting.
So good. And that it's a really clear signal, especially closing the laptop yourself is a super clear signal that this is what we're doing now. We're not doing that. But yet it's done in it's not judgmental. It's leading by example. I love that. Yeah, I'm gonna steal that one. That's great. I want to ask you the last question that I always ask everybody at the end. And that question is this: when you think of what it means to communicate confidence, what comes up for you?
Communicating confidence. And it's funny because I actually led a workshop in person last week, the first one in 2.5 years.
Wow.
Communicate with confidence. And what comes up for me is how somebody delivers that content, how someone delivers that content makes all the difference. So the person being able to speak in a way that's intentionally paced to rush through what they have to say, and loud enough so the person way in the back of the room can hear with ease, not having to lean forward and squint trying to focus. So, and the person that's able to pause and really connect with the audience by looking at them in the eye to see how what they're saying is landing on them. That for me, those three things combined are the formula to have communicating with confidence. Totally.
So pacing, loudness, and pausing, that's the golden triangle for you.
And eye contact too. Because when you're able to, that's what we would do in a one-on-one conversation with our loved ones. We're looking them in the eye. So doing that even with our audience, just especially this varies from culture to culture, whether we are encouraging people to look directly in the eye or elsewhere, but encouraging with our global companies and cultural communication to really allow that connection through the eyes or directly into the camera in the virtual space. That really allows the audience to connect with the warmth that that person has. It just allows for a better connection with the content as well as the speaker.
Yeah. And I love, excuse me, especially what you're saying about the pacing and the pausing. I find so many people struggle to slow down. I find especially women speak really fast. And I've been thinking about it a lot, like, well, why does this happen in my experience with more women than with men? And my theory is that we've kind of acculturated to this idea of, oh, well, what we say doesn't matter over so long, So getting our clients to slow down and really taking a moment to actually stop the flow of words and let that content sit in the air. When you think about it, it's really such a gift for the audience because the audience can't process all those words if they're coming out of you like a fire hose. So there's something for me about confidence and almost generosity. There's this interplay of I'm going to be confident because I care about your experience. So yeah, I don't know. How does that resonate for you at all?
Yeah, that does. That definitely does. And with some of the women that I've worked with, they've said that very similarly, that they feel like they just have to hurry up and get their ideas out of their head because somebody else is getting ready to jump in the conversation and they might not get a chance again.
Yeah.
So sometimes even in a roundtable discussion, combining those two, the volume and then the pause that's intentional, but not too long, depending on the culture of the team, really does help them to be like, okay, wow, I'm taking notice of what you said
Mhm.
because of
Mm.
how you said it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you said earlier about the example you gave with closing the laptop and shifting in your seat
Mhm.
is going to open up that door so that you can talk and get people's attention. But then once you've started talking, actually giving yourself space within what you're saying to breathe and to not say everything really fast. So it's a dance there. It's challenging to master, but that's definitely what confidence is for me too.
There's
Nice.
one other thing that I encourage for people that aren't leading the meeting, like that worked well for the manager of that meeting, but
Mhm.
those of us that are sitting in a group discussion and want to contribute, it's using the body once again. So being prepared with the volume, but literally doing something as simple as raising the hand, like, oh, I want to contribute too, or making eye contact with the person who's speaking at that moment. So they know there's like that physical reminder, okay, Rebecca wants to say something. Sheron has something to add. And that way people are less likely to continue the conversation when you have made it very known, just with the
Right.
like, oh yeah, I wanted to chime in there.
Yeah.
That person was
Yeah.
for.
That's great. And then it also eliminates the talking over, which then sounds super aggressive and it's just not pleasant for anyone. So yeah, I love that, some kind of physical cue.
Mhm.
Nice. Nice. Well, thank you, Sharon. I want to wrap it up a little early because I know that you've got stuff to do, and just wanted to thank you too. How was it for you? Was it enjoyable and interesting? Do you feel like this would be interesting for other people to hear?
I definitely do because, just like our workshops, Rebecca, we want to give people things that are practical and simple to try out and they can just take what works for them. And so anything that I can pass on that's worked for me or work with other clients that can help others, I
Yeah.
think it's a great amount of or great nuggets of content to have.
Yeah, I
And
think
it
so
was
too.
definitely very enjoyable because I'm just like, oh, let me think through
Good.
some of the stories. And they come like, what's it, flooding back? They come
Yeah.
flooding back years later because they were impactful in the results.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people, from hearing, like, we're two experts, right? We're communications experts. So hearing our war stories, if you will, or the behind the scenes of how we experience our clients, I think that's super interesting to people. I've never actually interviewed another communications coach. So I think this is going to be especially impactful and meaningful. I hope.